I watched my landlord tell his lawyer, forge his signature. That property's worth $1.2 million. I walked away smiling. 30 minutes later, his assistant called. There are federal agents at the office. Then she hung up. I was standing in the hallway outside Dennis Kellerman's office at 2:17 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon when I heard him say those words. The door was cracked open maybe 3 inches, enough that his voice carried into the corridor where I'd been waiting for what was supposed to be a routine lease renewal meeting. Dennis Kellerman, my landlord for the past 6 years, owner of Kellerman Properties, a man who drove a Tesla Model S and wore Rolex watches to property inspections, was telling his attorney to commit felony forgery. The property he was talking about wasn't just any property. It was mine. Or it would be mine in 8 days when the title transfer from my late uncle's estate finally cleared probate. I'd been living in a rent-controlled apartment in the Hawthorne district of Portland, Oregon, paying $1,450 a month for a 2-bedroom unit in a building Dennis owned. The building sat on a quarter-acre lot that had been rezoned for mixed-use development 2 years ago, which meant the land value had skyrocketed from maybe $400,000 to well over $2 million. But I didn't care about the building. I cared about the house next door, the Victorian-era Craftsman at 3847 Southeast Morrison Street, the house my Uncle Lawrence had lived in for 38 years before he died of a heart attack 3 months ago. Uncle Lawrence had left me that house in his will, along with the quarter-acre lot it sat on, a property now worth approximately $1.2 million, according to the most recent appraisal. Dennis's voice had been calm, businesslike, discussing fraud like he was ordering office supplies. The nephew, Nathan Reeves, he's been difficult about selling. I've offered him $850,000, which is generous considering the state of the property, but he keeps refusing. Says it's sentimental value, that his uncle wanted him to have it. The lawyer, someone named Gordon Fitch, according to the nameplate I'd seen in the reception area, had responded with concern. Dennis, you can't just forge someone's signature on a deed transfer. That's a felony. Wire fraud. Mail fraud if you use the postal service. We're talking federal charges. Dennis had laughed, actually laughed. Gordon, I've been doing real estate for 23 years. I know people. I have connections at the county recorder's office. We create a quitclaim deed, forge Nathan's signature, get it notarized by someone who owes me a favor, and record it before he even knows what happened. By the time he figures it out, the property is mine. He can try to fight it in court, but that'll take years and cost him a fortune he doesn't have. I'd stood there, phone in my pocket, recording everything, my hands perfectly steady, and thought about the past 3 months. Uncle Lawrence's death, the will reading, the discovery that he'd left me a property worth over $1 million, Dennis Kellerman's sudden interest in being my friend, the offers to buy, each one slightly higher than the last, the veiled threats when I kept refusing. It's a tough market, Nathan. Properties like that, they're expensive to maintain. Taxes, insurance, upkeep. You're a graphic designer making what, $60,000 a year? Maybe you should take the money while it's on the table. I'd smiled and declined every time because Uncle Lawrence had made me promise. Don't sell to developers, Nathan, he'd said 2 weeks before he died, when he'd updated his will and we both knew his heart was failing. That house has history. Our family's history. Keep it. Live in it. Make it yours. Now I understood why Dennis had been so persistent. The house sat on a lot that, combined with his adjacent apartment building, would create a half-acre development parcel, prime real estate in a gentrifying neighborhood, worth millions to the right developer, but he couldn't develop it without my property, so he decided to steal it. I'd pulled my phone from my pocket, stopped the recording, and walked quietly down the hallway, down the stairs, out of the building, and directly to my car. My hands were shaking now, adrenaline flooding my system. I sat in my 2019 Subaru Outback and called the first number on my list, the number I'd saved 3 weeks ago when I'd started suspecting something was wrong. Attorney Margaret Hollis answered on the second ring. Hollis Law Group, Margaret speaking. I'd hired Margaret 2 weeks after Uncle Lawrence died, when Dennis's offers started getting aggressive and something in my gut said I needed protection. Margaret was 51, Harvard Law, 26 years specializing in real estate fraud and elder abuse. Her office was in downtown Portland, 19th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place that charged $450 an hour and was worth every penny. Margaret, it's Nathan Reeves. I have a recording you need to hear. Like, right now. 30 minutes later, I was sitting in her office, phone connected to her laptop, playing the recording of Dennis Kellerman planning to forge my signature. Margaret listened without expression, her face unreadable until the recording ended. Then she looked at me and smiled, sharp and predatory. Nathan, do you understand what you just handed me? I nodded. Evidence of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, forgery, and about 6 other felonies. She leaned back in her leather chair. This is beyond state charges. This is federal. The FBI handles real estate fraud over certain dollar amounts, and $1.2 million definitely qualifies. We need to contact them immediately, but first, I need to verify something. Has Dennis Kellerman or anyone associated with him contacted you about signing any documents in the past week? I thought back. His assistant, Kelly Vaughn, called me yesterday. Said there was some paperwork related to my lease renewal that needed my signature. I told her I'd come by today at 2:30 p.m. That's why I was at his office. Margaret made notes on a yellow legal pad. He was setting you up. Get you in the office. Have you sign a stack of papers? Slip the forged deed in the middle? Hope you don't read carefully. Classic fraud tactic. She picked up her desk phone. I'm calling FBI Special Agent Linda Kozlowski. She's in the white-collar crimes division. I've worked with her on 3 previous real estate fraud cases. She's excellent. I listened as Margaret explained the situation to Agent Kozlowski. Professional, precise, devastating. When she hung up, she looked at me. Linda wants to meet with you today, 4 p.m. at the Federal Building. Bring your phone with the recording, bring any documentation of Dennis's offers to purchase the property, and bring your uncle's will and the probate documents. This is happening fast, Nathan. Federal agents don't wait around when they have evidence this clean. The FBI field office was in the Mark O. Hatfield Federal Courthouse, downtown Portland, all concrete and security checkpoints and the weight of federal authority. Special Agent Linda Kozlowski met me in a conference room on the 8th floor. She was 43, Stanford undergraduate, Quantico training, 11 years with the Bureau specializing in financial crimes. Short dark hair, sharp suit, eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Reeves, I've listened to the recording your attorney sent over. I need you to walk me through everything from the beginning. I told her about Uncle Lawrence, about the inheritance, about Dennis Kellerman's increasingly aggressive attempts to buy the property, about the conversation I'd overheard. She made notes, asked clarifying questions, requested documentation. The recording is clear evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, she said finally. But I need more before I can move forward with an arrest. I need evidence that Dennis Kellerman has the capability and intent to follow through on this plan. I pulled out my phone, showed her the text messages from Kelly Vaughn, Dennis's assistant. Come by the office Thursday at 2:30 p.m. Dennis has paperwork for you to review regarding the property and your lease renewal. Should only take a few minutes. Agent Kozlowski photographed the messages. Good. What else? I'd brought a folder, documentation I'd been keeping because something about Dennis had always felt off. 6 months of emails from Dennis offering to buy the property, starting at $650,000 and climbing to $850,000. 3 voicemails, where his tone shifted from friendly to irritated to subtly threatening. A letter from Kellerman Properties offering to assist with estate planning and property disposition 2 days after Uncle Lawrence's death, before the will had even been read. You've been preparing for this, Agent Kozlowski observed. Not this specifically, I said. But my uncle taught me to document everything. He didn't trust landlords, said they'd rob you blind if you let them. Agent Kozlowski smiled faintly. Your uncle was right. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to open a formal investigation into Dennis Kellerman and Kellerman Properties. We'll start by subpoenaing his financial records, his communications with Gordon Fitch, and any documents related to your property. If we find evidence that he's attempted similar fraud in the past, or if he moves forward with forging your signature, we'll arrest him. In the meantime, you need to be careful. Don't sign anything. Don't meet with him alone. And if he contacts you, record everything. She handed me her business card. My direct number. If anything happens, call me immediately. I left the Federal Building at 5:43 p.m., my head spinning with the reality that I'd just set a federal investigation in motion. The next morning, Friday, I was at my desk at Cascade Design Studios, the small graphic design firm where I'd worked for the past 8 years, trying to focus on a logo redesign for a local brewery, when my phone rang. Kelly Vaughn, Dennis Kellerman's assistant. I hit record on my phone app before answering. Nathan, hi, it's Kelly from Kellerman Properties. You missed your appointment yesterday. Her voice was professional, friendly, the voice of someone who had no idea her boss was planning felony fraud. Sorry about that, I said, keeping my tone casual. Something came up. Can we reschedule? There was a pause. Actually, Dennis was wondering if you could come by today. He really needs to finalize some things with your lease and the estate paperwork. It's kind of urgent. Urgent, because he wanted to forge my signature before I caught on. I'm pretty busy today. How about Monday? Another pause, longer this time. Nathan, I'm going to be honest. Dennis is getting frustrated. You've been putting this off for weeks. If you don't come in and sign the paperwork, there might be issues with your lease renewal. That was a threat. Subtle, but clear. Sign what we want, or lose your apartment. Kelly, my lease doesn't expire for 6 months. What paperwork are you talking about? She hesitated. I'm not sure exactly. Dennis handles all the details, but he said it's important. I made my decision. Tell Dennis I'll come by Monday at 3 p.m. That's the best I can do. She agreed and hung up. I immediately called Margaret Hollis. They're pressuring me to come in and sign documents. Kelly just threatened my lease renewal if I don't comply. Margaret's voice went hard. Don't go. Under no circumstances go to that office alone. I'm calling Agent Kozlowski. This is escalating faster than I expected. 20 minutes later, Agent Kozlowski called me directly. Mr. Reeves, we're accelerating the investigation. I'm getting a warrant to search Kellerman Properties this afternoon. We have enough probable cause based on the recording and the pattern of coercive behavior. I need you to stay away from that office. Don't contact Dennis. Don't contact Kelly. Don't engage at all. Let us handle this. At 3:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. Text from Kelly Vaughn. Nathan, there are federal agents here. They have a warrant. They're going through everything. Dennis is freaking out. What did you do? I didn't respond. Just sat at my desk, heart pounding, and waited. 30 minutes later, another text. They're taking computers, files, everything. Dennis is yelling at them about his lawyer. This is insane. Then at 4:02 p.m., a call from an unknown number. I answered. Mr. Reeves, this is Special Agent Linda Kozlowski. We've executed the search warrant. I need you to know we found something significant. My hands went cold. What? She paused, and I could hear voices in the background. Official. Urgent. We found a completed quitclaim deed for your property with your forged signature. It was in Dennis Kellerman's desk drawer, ready to be filed. We also found correspondence with a notary public who works for the county, discussing payment for notarizing documents without proper identification verification. This is bigger than one attempted forgery, Nathan. We're looking at a pattern of fraud that might go back years. I couldn't breathe. He already forged it? Agent Kozlowski's voice was firm, reassuring. He created the document, but it hasn't been filed with the county recorder's office. We seized it before he could execute the fraud. You're safe. Your property is safe. But Dennis Kellerman is about to have a very bad day. She hung up. I sat in my office, surrounded by half-finished designs and cold coffee, and realized I'd just saved myself from losing everything. The weekend passed in a blur of phone calls with Margaret, meetings with Agent Kozlowski, and the surreal experience of watching my landlord's arrest make the local news. Portland real estate developer arrested on federal fraud charges ran the headline in the Oregonian on Saturday morning. The article detailed how Dennis Kellerman, owner of Kellerman Properties, had been arrested Friday afternoon on charges of wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud in connection with an alleged scheme to steal property from a tenant through forged documents. The story didn't name me, but it mentioned that federal agents had seized computers and files from Kellerman Properties and were investigating whether similar fraudulent schemes had targeted other property owners. By Sunday evening, Margaret called with an update. The FBI found evidence of at least 4 other properties where Dennis used similar tactics. Elderly property owners, people going through probate, anyone vulnerable. He'd make lowball offers, and if they refused, he'd forge signatures or manipulate documents to transfer property into his name. They're estimating he's stolen close to $6 million in property value over the past 8 years. I felt sick. $6 million? Margaret's voice was grim. He's looking at 20 years minimum in federal prison if he's convicted. The U.S. Attorney's Office is building a massive case. Wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. They want to make an example of him. Monday morning, I called Kelly Vaughn. Not because I wanted to gloat, but because I needed to understand something. She answered, her voice small, defeated. Nathan, I swear I didn't know. Dennis told me the documents were legitimate lease renewals and estate paperwork. I had no idea he was forging anything. I believed her. Kelly had always been professional, kind even, and she'd worked for Dennis for only 2 years. I know, Kelly. I'm not blaming you. She started crying. The FBI questioned me for 3 hours. They took my computer, my phone. I lost my job. Dennis's whole company is shutting down. All his properties are being seized as evidence. I don't know what I'm going to do. I felt a flash of sympathy. Kelly, talk to the FBI. Cooperate fully. If you weren't involved in the fraud, they'll leave you alone. But you might have information that helps their case. She sniffled. They said the same thing. I'm meeting with them again tomorrow with my lawyer. After I hung up, I sat in the apartment I'd rented from Dennis Kellerman for 6 years, the apartment I'd now have to vacate because his entire property portfolio was being frozen by federal marshals, and thought about Uncle Lawrence. He'd known. Somehow, he'd known that Dennis was dangerous, that leaving me the property would put me in Dennis's crosshairs, and he'd still done it because he trusted me to fight back. You're smarter than you think, Nathan, Uncle Lawrence had told me on one of our last Sunday visits before he died. We'd been sitting on the porch of the Victorian house, drinking coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. You notice things. You document things. That's a rare quality. Most people go through life assuming everyone else is honest. You know better. I'd laughed at the time, thought he was being paranoid. Now I understood. He'd been preparing me. The preliminary hearing was set for 6 weeks later, mid-December. The federal courthouse was packed with people Dennis had allegedly defrauded, elderly couples who'd lost family homes, children who'd lost inheritances, all of us gathered to watch justice begin. Assistant U.S. Attorney Denise Kapoor presented the government's case with devastating precision. 41, Columbia law, 9 years prosecuting white-collar crime for the Justice Department. She outlined the scheme, displayed the forged documents, showed email correspondence between Dennis and Gordon Fitch discussing creative solutions to property acquisition challenges, which was apparently code for fraud. She called Agent Kozlowski to testify about the search warrant execution, about finding the forged quitclaim deed in Dennis's desk, about the network of corrupt notaries and county employees Dennis had paid to facilitate his frauds. Then she called me. I'd never testified in court before, had only seen trials on TV, but Margaret had prepared me thoroughly. Stay calm. Answer only what's asked. Don't embellish. Tell the truth. I walked to the witness stand, was sworn in, and faced the courtroom. Denise Kapoor approached with a tablet. "Mr. Reeves, is this the recording you made on Thursday, October 19th, at approximately 2:17 p.m.? I confirmed it was. She played it for the courtroom, Dennis's voice clear and damning. "We create a quitclaim deed, forge Nathan's signature, get it notarized by someone who owes me a favor, and record it before he even knows what happened." You could hear the collective intake of breath from the gallery. Denise asked me to explain the context, the history of Dennis's attempts to purchase my property, the pressure tactics, the threats about my lease renewal. I spoke for 20 minutes, and by the end, Dennis Kellerman was sitting at the defense table with his head in his hands. His attorney, a public defender named Russell Brennan because Gordon Fitch had refused to represent him once the federal charges were filed, tried to argue that the recording was taken without consent, that it violated Oregon's two-party consent law for recordings. Denise Kapoor destroyed that argument in 3 sentences. "Your Honor, Oregon's consent law applies to private conversations. Mr. Reeves overheard a conversation in a semi-public hallway where the door was open and voices were audible to anyone passing by. There's no expectation of privacy. Furthermore, federal wiretapping laws include exceptions for preventing criminal activity, which this recording clearly demonstrates." Judge Raymond Kaufman, 68, appointed by Clinton, 23 years on the federal bench, ruled the recording admissible. The defendant's own words are the most damning evidence in this case. Motion denied. The hearing lasted 4 hours. By the end, Dennis Kellerman was ordered held without bail pending trial, deemed a flight risk given the severity of the charges and the evidence he'd been moving money to offshore accounts. The trial date was set for March. As I left the courthouse, reporters crowded the steps, asking questions about the case, about my uncle, about how it felt to stop a major fraud scheme. I said nothing, just walked past them to where Margaret was waiting. "You did well in there," she said. "Composed, credible, believable. The jury is going to love you when this goes to trial." Trial. The word still felt surreal. "Do you think it'll actually go to trial?" I asked. Margaret shrugged. "Depends on whether Dennis's attorney can convince him to take a plea deal. With evidence this strong, he's looking at 20 years if convicted at trial. The U.S. attorney might offer 10 years if he pleads guilty and provides information about his co-conspirators." Christmas came and went. I'd moved out of the apartment building Dennis owned, found a month-to-month rental in southeast Portland while I figured out my next step. The Victorian house, Uncle Lawrence's house, my house now that probate had finally cleared, sat empty. I'd been inside once since his death, walked through the rooms filled with his furniture and his books and the smell of pipe tobacco that still lingered in the study. It felt wrong to change anything, to erase him. But I couldn't live there yet either. Not while the trial was pending, not while reporters occasionally showed up looking for comments, not while the weight of everything that had happened still pressed down on my chest like concrete. January brought a development I hadn't expected. Gordon Fitch, Dennis's attorney who'd been on the recording discussing the forgery, was arrested on conspiracy charges. Turned out he'd helped Dennis with at least 3 previous fraudulent property transfers and had taken kickbacks in exchange for his silence and assistance. The local bar association opened an ethics investigation. Gordon's law license was suspended pending the outcome of the criminal case. And suddenly, Dennis's defense became even weaker because his co-conspirator was facing his own prosecution and had every incentive to cooperate with the government. Margaret called me on a Friday evening in mid-January. Dennis took a plea deal, pleaded guilty to wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and forgery. 15 years in federal prison, full restitution to all victims, and cooperation in prosecuting Gordon Fitch and the corrupt notaries. 15 years. The man who'd tried to steal my inheritance would spend the next decade and a half in a federal penitentiary. "How do you feel?" Margaret asked. I thought about it. Relieved, vindicated, and exhausted. She laughed softly. "That's the appropriate response. You should also feel proud, Nathan. You stopped a career criminal. You protected not just yourself, but potentially dozens of other people he might have targeted in the future." The sentencing hearing was in March, a cold Wednesday morning with rain hammering the courthouse windows. I sat in the gallery with Margaret, watching Dennis Kellerman stand before Judge Kaufman in an orange jumpsuit, his Rolex long gone, his Tesla seized by federal marshals, his real estate empire dissolved. Judge Kaufman read the charges, the plea agreement, and the impact statements from victims. Then he looked at Dennis. "Mr. Kellerman, you exploited vulnerable people during some of the most difficult moments of their lives. You stole homes, inheritances, and futures. You corrupted the legal system and betrayed the trust inherent in property law. 15 years is what you agreed to, and it's what you'll serve. But I want you to understand something. You didn't just steal property. You stole security, stability, and peace of mind from dozens of families. That's unforgivable." Dennis said nothing, had nothing to say. The marshals led him away, and that was it. Over. I walked out of the courthouse into the rain, felt it soak through my jacket, cold and cleansing. Margaret offered me a ride, but I wanted to walk, needed to walk. I ended up at the Victorian house, Uncle Lawrence's house, standing on the porch where we'd had that last conversation. The house needed work. New roof, updated electrical, fresh paint. But it was solid. Good bones, Uncle Lawrence used to say. Built to last. I pulled out my phone, called a contractor I'd been researching. "Hi, this is Nathan Reeves. I own the property at 3847 Southeast Morrison Street. I'd like to schedule an estimate for renovation work. I'm planning to move in. 6 months later, I was living in the house. I'd kept most of Uncle Lawrence's furniture, added my own touches, turned his study into my home office where I ran my freelance graphic design business. The neighborhood had continued gentrifying around me, property values climbing, developers circling, but I wasn't selling. Not to Dennis Kellerman's successors, not to anyone. This was home. On a Sunday morning in September, I was on the porch drinking coffee when an elderly woman walked by, stopped, looked up at the house. "You're Lawrence's nephew, aren't you?" she asked. I nodded. "Nathan, you are?" She smiled. "Dorothy Lynn, I live 3 doors down. Your uncle and I were friends for 20 years. I just wanted to say I'm glad you kept the house. Lawrence would be so proud of what you did, stopping that awful man who tried to steal it." I felt my throat tighten. "Thank you. That means a lot." Dorothy nodded. "Your uncle always said you were special, said you had integrity, which is rare these days. He was right." She continued her walk, and I sat there in the morning sun, holding my coffee, thinking about integrity and documentation and the recording that had saved everything. My phone buzzed. Text from Margaret. "Saw the news. Gordon Fitch was sentenced to 8 years, last of Dennis's co-conspirators convicted. Thought you'd want to know." I replied with a thumbs up, set my phone down, and looked out at the neighborhood Uncle Lawrence had loved, the house he'd protected, the legacy he'd trusted me to defend. I'd done it, kept my promise, honored his memory. And in the process, I'd learned something Uncle Lawrence had probably known all along. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply pay attention, document the truth, and refuse to let criminals win. The house at 3847 Southeast Morrison Street was worth $1.3 million now, according to the latest assessment. But it would never be for sale. Because some things aren't measured in money. Some things are measured in promises kept, in legacies honored, in the moment you stand up to someone trying to steal your future and say no. Uncle Lawrence had given me more than property. He'd given me a lesson in courage, in preparation, in trusting my instincts when something felt wrong. And I'd given him something in return, the certainty that his house, his history, his family's story would continue. That the man who'd tried to erase all of that was the one who'd been erased instead. 15 years in federal prison, everything he'd built, destroyed. All because he'd underestimated a graphic designer with a recording app and the determination to fight back. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.